Judge Emma Taylor stands tall in her courtroom, a woman in her early 50s who has built a reputation as one of the most feared judges in the country. Known for her cold, ruthless rulings, especially against marginalized groups, her courtroom is her domain, and she runs it with an iron fist. Everyone who steps inside knows who's in charge. Her. Her decisions are swift, her rulings are final, and there's no one who dares question her. In a world where power often hides behind expensive suits and high-profile titles, Judge Taylor has carved out her own kind of authority. She's untouchable. Her harsh judgments are seen as just the way things are, with no room for debate, no space for mercy. It's almost as if she believes she holds the final say on who gets to live and who gets to suffer, all from the seat of a powerful position in the courtroom. But in the midst of this powerful world, one woman is about to make her stand. Meet Rachel Lee, the Minister of Justice. Known for her unwavering commitment to fairness, equality, and justice, Lee is a figure who's built a reputation of her own. She's not here for the politics or the power games. She's here for justice, and she will stop at nothing to ensure that truth is upheld. This is where the stage is set for a collision. On one side, we have Judge Taylor, with her years of unchecked power, and on the other, Rachel Lee, who won't stand by and let her manipulation of the system go unnoticed. It's the ultimate clash of arrogance against integrity, and as Taylor's empire stands firm, Lee is ready to prove that no one, not even a judge, is above the law. Before we dive deeper into this heart-wrenching journey, I want to know, where are you watching from today? Whether you're in the city or somewhere far away, leave a comment and let us know. And if you're already feeling the tension, go ahead and hit that like and subscribe button. The Grand Courtroom in Washington, D.C. stood as a monument to the rule of law, its marble floors polished to a perfect shine. High, arched windows let in streams of light, casting the room in an almost ethereal glow. The walls were lined with bookshelves filled with law books, each one a testament to the traditions of justice that had shaped the nation. But despite the symbols of fairness and impartiality surrounding them, there was a heavy, palpable tension in the air. This was not a neutral space. This was Judge Emma Taylor's domain. Judge Taylor sat at the front of the room, elevated high on her bench, dressed in her black robes that seemed to command attention and respect. Her eyes, cold and calculating, swept across the courtroom with an air of authority that left little room for disagreement. She had earned a reputation over the years as one of the most ruthless judges to ever sit in this very room. Her rulings were swift and harsh, especially when it came to marginalized communities. She showed no leniency, no mercy, and she believed it was her right to be the final word in every case that came before her. Her power, though, wasn't just a matter of what she did within these walls. It extended far beyond the courtroom. Over the years, she had built connections, political, financial, and social, that insulated her from any form of accountability. She had a tight grip on Washington's legal system, and those who dared to challenge her found themselves out of their depth, their careers ruined, their reputations destroyed. She was untouchable, and she knew it. Today, the stakes felt higher than ever. The courtroom was filled with spectators, reporters, and a few curious onlookers. But as Judge Taylor glanced around the room, it was clear that none of them posed a threat. The whispers of the crowd died down as soon as she spoke, and with every command, the officers in the room followed without hesitation. She was the one in control, the one whose word determined the fate of anyone who appeared before her. It was a power that many feared and few dared to challenge. But then, the doors to the courtroom opened, and in walked a woman who would soon threaten everything Judge Taylor held dear. Rachel Lee, the Minister of Justice, stepped into the room. Unlike the people in the gallery, Rachel didn't sit in silence or shrink into the shadows. She walked in with purpose, her head held high, her presence immediately commanding attention. Rachel wasn't just a politician. She was a symbol of integrity in a world that had long been corrupted by power. She had spent her career fighting for justice, for equality, and for the voiceless. To her, the law wasn't a tool to wield for personal gain. It was a promise to uphold, no matter the cost. She took a seat, but she wasn't here just to observe the proceedings. Rachel was here to hold Judge Taylor accountable for the abuses that had gone unchecked for too long. She had spent years gathering evidence of Taylor's corruption, bias, and manipulation of the legal system. And now, she was ready to bring it to light. Rachel's mission was clear: expose the truth, no matter how powerful or untouchable Taylor might seem. She wasn't intimidated by the grandeur of the courtroom or the woman sitting at the bench above her. Unlike Judge Taylor, Rachel knew that the law had to be fair to all, not just to those who had the power to bend it to their will. As the case began, Judge Taylor looked down from her high perch, a look of disdain barely hidden behind her cool, professional demeanor. She had no respect for Rachel, no respect for anyone who threatened her carefully constructed empire. She made sure to keep her voice steady and her gaze piercing as she addressed the room. But as Rachel's case unfolded, Taylor's carefully maintained composure began to crack. The conflict between them wasn't just about the case at hand anymore. It was about something deeper, something personal. When Judge Taylor, in a rare public display of disrespect, undermined Rachel's efforts with a sarcastic remark, it was more than just an attack on her authority. It was a direct challenge to everything Rachel stood for. Taylor had crossed a line, and in doing so, she had unknowingly escalated this case into a battle for the very soul of justice itself. Rachel knew this wouldn't be easy. She knew she was taking on a giant, a woman who had wielded her power unchecked for far too long. But she wasn't afraid. She had spent her life fighting for the truth, and she was ready to do it again. What began as a legal confrontation quickly transformed into a personal vendetta, one that would pit the pursuit of justice against the corruption of power. And in the end, only one of them could stand victorious. Rachel Lee was not a woman easily intimidated. She had spent her entire life challenging the systems that others had long considered untouchable. Tall, composed, and always calm under pressure, she was a beacon of integrity in a world that had too often been ruled by power and manipulation. She walked into the courtroom not as someone seeking approval or validation, but as a woman with a purpose: to hold Judge Emma Taylor accountable for the abuse of power that had defined her career. Rachel's presence contrasted sharply with Judge Taylor's. Where Taylor sat high on her bench with an air of disdain, Rachel remained grounded and focused. Her eyes didn't wander around the room in search of approval. They were fixed on the judge, on the woman whose every decision had echoed through the lives of so many, shaping destinies with a cold hand. Rachel knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Taylor was powerful, and she had spent years building an empire that was insulated by wealth, influence, and connections. But Rachel had something Taylor didn't: the unwavering truth. And she would not be silenced. Rachel's calmness was almost unnerving in its clarity. Every word she spoke was measured, every argument carefully thought out. She wasn't here to make grand speeches or appeal to the media. She was here to expose the corruption that had poisoned the very foundation of the justice system. As the case progressed, her questions began to cut through the air, revealing the cracks in Taylor's carefully constructed facade. But Taylor, ever the master of manipulation, didn't take kindly to the spotlight being turned on her. The moment Rachel made her move, Taylor fired back with her typical arrogance. She mocked Rachel's investigation in front of the press, belittling her efforts as nothing more than a waste of time. "It's cute," she said with a cold, condescending smile. "But this isn't about integrity, Minister Lee. It's about power. And you're clearly out of your depth." The reporters gathered around laughed nervously, but Rachel's gaze remained unflinching. Taylor had underestimated Rachel. This wasn't the first time someone had tried to challenge her, but this was the first time someone had stood up to her with such dignity. Rachel wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for every person Taylor had ever wronged. And with every word, every piece of evidence Rachel brought to the table, the case shifted. The spotlight wasn't on Rachel anymore. It was on Taylor. As the days passed, the evidence began to pile up. There were whispers in the halls of the courthouse, small murmurs from those who had once stood beside Taylor. Colleagues who had been loyal to her for years now found themselves questioning the very foundation of her rulings. Her decisions, once seen as infallible, were suddenly being scrutinized. The walls Taylor had built around herself started to show cracks, and for the first time, she felt the weight of her own corruption. The pressure began to build. Rachel's investigation had started to expose things that Taylor thought she could keep buried forever. The financial discrepancies, the biased rulings, the favors exchanged behind closed doors. Taylor tried to fight back, using her influence to silence those who spoke out against her. But this time, it wasn't working. Her once untouchable empire was starting to crumble. And with every attempt to cover her tracks, she only dug herself deeper into a hole. Her colleagues, once her staunchest supporters, were now divided. Some had already started distancing themselves from her, fearful that they might be dragged into her web of deceit. Others, though, continued to support her in silence, too afraid of the consequences of defying the powerful judge. But as the evidence continued to mount, it became clear that Judge Taylor's reign was nearing its end. Rachel Lee wasn't just exposing a corrupt judge. She was starting to dismantle the system that had allowed Judge Taylor to flourish for so long. And Taylor, with all her power, could no longer ignore the threat looming over her. As the days passed, the calm confidence that had once defined Judge Emma Taylor began to slip away. The cracks in her armor, once small and barely noticeable, now widened with every passing hour. She had always been the embodiment of control, sitting atop the legal hierarchy with a cold, unwavering demeanor. But now, the weight of the evidence mounting against her was becoming too heavy to bear. The courthouse, once her domain, now felt like a place where whispers of doubt and betrayal echoed through the halls. What had started as quiet murmurs of suspicion grew into loud, unmistakable conversations. Judge Taylor's allies, those who had once blindly followed her lead, were starting to question their loyalty. It was clear that her reign of influence was coming to an end, and with each passing day, she could feel her grip on power slipping further and further away. Inside the courtroom, the once confident and impervious judge now seemed on edge, her sharp words faltering, her once unshakable presence replaced with a growing sense of panic. Outside the courtroom, FBI agents were gathering evidence. They began to investigate her financial dealings, scrutinizing her connections, the wealth she had amassed, and the questionable transactions she had made over the years. The walls she had carefully built to shield her from consequences were starting to crumble under the weight of scrutiny. Behind closed doors, Taylor's meetings with her allies grew increasingly frantic. She no longer spoke with the commanding authority that had once made everyone around her fear even the slightest disobedience. Now, she was desperate, pleading with those who had once bent to her will, trying to find a way out of the mess she had created. But her attempts to manipulate the situation fell flat. Her colleagues, once too afraid to challenge her, were now openly questioning her decisions, some even distancing themselves from her. They could no longer ignore the fact that her power had been built on lies, on corruption, on taking advantage of others. Meanwhile, Minister Lee's investigation was gaining momentum. Her team had uncovered a wealth of damning evidence, documents, emails, financial records, all showing the extent of Judge Taylor's abuse of power. It wasn't just about the biased rulings. It was about the favors, the shady deals, the way Taylor had used her position to enrich herself and destroy anyone who dared to cross her. At the same time, Taylor, feeling cornered, began to pull at every string she could find. She used her powerful connections to try and shut down the investigation, hoping that someone, anyone, could make this all go away. She made phone calls, pulled strings, and attempted to intimidate anyone who stood in her way. But this time, her usual tactics didn't work. The more she tried to silence the truth, the more desperate she seemed. As the investigation gained steam, her assets were frozen. Her bank accounts, properties, everything she had built, once the symbols of her unchallenged power, were now under scrutiny. The public, who had once revered her as an untouchable figure, began to turn on her. News outlets exposed her actions, and what had been whispers about corruption and bias became the loud, undeniable truth. People who had once seen her as a face of justice now saw her for what she really was. A woman who had betrayed the very system she was supposed to uphold. The walls were closing in on Judge Taylor. She had spent years cultivating an image of invincibility, of being untouchable. But now, as the truth surfaced, she was realizing that no amount of power, no amount of money, could shield her from the consequences of her actions. The public was watching, and the once unassailable judge was finally starting to crumble. The tension in the courtroom was palpable. Every eye was fixed on Judge Taylor. But this time, there was a noticeable shift in the air. The familiar atmosphere of control that she had once commanded was now being slowly stripped away, replaced by a growing sense of vulnerability. On the other side, Minister Rachel Lee stood tall, calm, focused, and unwavering. Her team, methodical and precise, expertly navigated the proceedings, carefully presenting their case against the judge who had long been untouchable. Judge Taylor, once known for her sharp tongue and intimidating presence, was now struggling to maintain the facade of power. She attempted to manipulate the proceedings, throwing objections and making last-ditch efforts to control the courtroom. But with every move she made, Minister Lee's resolve only seemed stronger. Lee's confidence in her legal strategy was unshakable, and it showed in the way she presented her case, slowly, methodically dismantling every argument Taylor put forth. With each piece of evidence she introduced, with every argument she made, the courtroom saw the cracks in Taylor's defense grow wider. The shift in power was unmistakable. Judge Taylor had always prided herself on being the one in control, the one who dictated the terms of every case. But now, as Lee presented undeniable evidence of Taylor's misconduct, her authority seemed to dissipate before the eyes of everyone in the room. The carefully curated image of fairness and integrity that Taylor had built over the years was quickly unraveling. Testimonies from those who had suffered under her biased rulings were now a powerful tool in Lee's arsenal, and they painted a clear, devastating picture of the damage Taylor had caused. It wasn't just about her decisions. It was about the lives she had destroyed, the careers she had ruined, and the people she had trampled in her pursuit of power. One by one, the victims of Taylor's biased rulings took the stand, each story more heartbreaking than the last. A mother who had lost custody of her children because of a biased ruling. A young man who had been sentenced to years in prison for a crime he didn't commit. Their emotional testimonies were raw, real, and impossible to ignore. As each victim spoke, the courtroom grew more and more silent, the weight of their words settling over everyone present. Taylor, once unflappable, couldn't hide the flicker of unease that now crossed her face. The tide was turning, and she could feel it. As the evidence continued to pile up against her, Taylor's arrogance, which had always been her shield, began to crumble. The confidence she had once carried into every decision now gave way to something far less certain: desperation. She tried to interrupt, to discredit the witnesses. But each time she did, Minister Lee was ready, countering her every move with poise and precision. It became clear that Taylor's reign was nearing its end, and as the emotional stakes of the trial continued to rise, the courtroom knew it. The case was no longer just about justice for the victims. It was about holding someone who had long believed herself above the law accountable for the harm she had caused. With every passing moment, the evidence against Taylor grew more undeniable. Her defense, once carefully constructed, had no answer to the mounting pile of testimonies and documents. The once proud judge, who had thrived on controlling the courtroom, was now a mere shadow of her former self. Her influence, once feared by all, was now gone. The battle that had started as a fight for justice had turned into something more personal, a reckoning for the woman who had once wielded her power without consequence. And now, as the courtroom watched in hushed silence, Judge Emma Taylor was forced to face the truth. The very justice she had long overlooked was now coming for her. As the trial continued, Judge Taylor's desperation began to show. She had always been the one to control the room, the one whose word was final. But now, as the evidence mounted against her, and with Minister Lee always one step ahead, Taylor resorted to more extreme measures in a last-ditch effort to salvage her crumbling empire. She tried to discredit witnesses, casting doubt on their credibility, claiming they were only out for revenge. She attempted to intimidate the jury, making subtle threats that only made the tension in the courtroom thicker. Her remaining allies, those who still held loyalty to her, were called upon to delay the proceedings, but their efforts fell short. Every move she made was met with an immediate counter from Minister Lee, whose legal strategy was flawless, pushing Taylor further into a corner with each passing moment. The desperation in Taylor's eyes grew with every failed attempt. The judge who had once ruled with an iron fist, never once questioning her ability to manipulate the system, now found herself powerless in a game she thought she controlled. The once unshakable confidence she had displayed in the face of opposition had evaporated, replaced by a woman who could no longer deny the truth. She could feel the weight of her actions crushing her. It wasn't just her career on the line now. It was her entire life. Every power she had once held, every connection she had used to maintain her position, was slipping through her fingers irreversibly. In the quiet moments when the courtroom fell silent, Taylor couldn't help but reflect on how far she had fallen. She had ridiculed Minister Lee from the very beginning, dismissing her as another public figure who didn't understand how things worked in the real world of justice. But now, as the tide turned against her, Taylor began to realize that Lee was everything she had never been. Where Taylor had used her power to crush others, Lee used her integrity to bring justice to those who had been wronged. Taylor's arrogance had blinded her to the very thing that had always been at the heart of the legal system: fairness. Minister Lee's calm, unwavering composure in the face of Taylor's attacks only highlighted the true power that lay in judicial integrity. While Taylor floundered, desperate to hang on to her reputation, Lee's actions spoke louder than words. Every argument she presented, every witness she brought to the stand, demonstrated her commitment to justice, a commitment Taylor had long forgotten. Lee wasn't just winning the battle in the courtroom. She was showing everyone in the room what real power looked like. It wasn't in manipulation or intimidation. It was in standing firm in the face of adversity and ensuring that the truth was heard. Taylor could see it now. Her reign, built on lies and manipulation, was ending. Her desperate attempts to control the outcome were futile against the strength of a woman who truly understood the power of justice. The walls she had built to protect herself, the connections she had once leaned on, were all crumbling before her eyes. The empire she had spent years building was falling apart, piece by piece, and the woman she had once belittled had proven that integrity was the strongest weapon of all. As the courtroom continued to watch, the once mighty Judge Taylor, reduced to a mere shadow of her former self, realized that the game was over. The battle for justice had been won, not by the woman with the most connections, but by the woman who had never wavered in her dedication to what was right. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. Minister Lee had won, and there was nothing Taylor could do to stop it. The end of her reign was here, and it was inevitable. The courtroom falls silent as Judge Taylor stands, her shoulders slumped, her once proud and unyielding figure now diminished. Her eyes, once full of disdain and power, now show signs of vulnerability. The gavel of the court strikes down, the sound echoing through the room, as Judge Taylor's fate is sealed. The room is heavy with anticipation, and everyone waits for the final moment, the moment that will determine the consequences of her actions. The judge's voice cuts through the silence, cold and unwavering, as she delivers the sentence. Judge Emma Taylor, you are hereby sentenced to 20 years in prison for your abuse of power, corruption, and biased rulings. Your actions have caused irreparable harm to the very people you were sworn to protect. The words hit like a hammer, resonating throughout the courtroom, and there is a brief pause before the sentence continues. In addition to your prison sentence, you are hereby stripped of your law license. You will never again serve in any capacity as a judge. Furthermore, you will undergo mandatory rehabilitation to confront and address your deep-rooted prejudices. The weight of the sentence is undeniable. This isn't just a loss of freedom. This is a dismantling of the empire Taylor had worked so hard to build. Her name, once synonymous with power and authority, is now tainted. The very foundation of her career has been torn away. The contrast between her downfall and Minister Lee's quiet, yet unshakable, strength couldn't be more stark. While Taylor stands in the ruins of everything she once controlled, Minister Lee watches with a calm demeanor, the satisfaction of victory shining through her composed expression. Lee's victory is not just in the court's judgment. It's in the principles she upholds, principles that have remained intact throughout this long battle. Lee's integrity has prevailed, and the justice system has been restored. For the first time in a long time, Taylor realizes the true meaning of power. It wasn't in the influence she wielded, nor in the network of connections she built, but in the steadfast dedication to what is right, something Lee had always known. As Taylor's name is read aloud in the courtroom, stripped of all the status she once enjoyed, the world now sees her for what she truly is. A woman who abused her power and, in the end, was undone by the very system she thought she could control. Minister Lee's face remains unreadable, but inside, she knows that justice has been served. Taylor's arrogance and disregard for the law were no match for Lee's commitment to fairness. The emotional weight of this moment is felt by everyone present. As Taylor is escorted from the courtroom in handcuffs, it's clear that the battle has been won, not by the one who wielded the most power, but by the one who held on to the truth and fought for justice, no matter the cost. The courtroom, once filled with tension and uncertainty, now feels lighter. The scales of justice have finally tipped in favor of fairness, and for Minister Lee, the triumph is complete. True justice, after all, is not about personal gain or power. It's about holding people accountable for their actions and restoring balance to the system. As the doors to the courtroom close behind Judge Taylor, her sentence is final, and the room is left with the undeniable truth. No one, no matter how high they rise, is beyond the reach of true justice. As the media frenzy swirls around Judge Taylor's conviction, the cameras capture every moment of her entrance into the prison. The once towering figure of power, now reduced to an inmate, is escorted into a holding cell as reporters shout questions, trying to get a glimpse of the woman who once ruled over the lives of so many. The world watches as Taylor, stripped of her law license and her former glory, is led away in chains. The public is left to reflect on the years of damage caused by her biased and ruthless rulings. Families that suffered under her oppression now see justice served, and they can finally breathe a sigh of relief. While Taylor's supporters attempt to defend her in the press, claiming that the system has wronged her, the people who truly understand the weight of justice know the truth. Judge Taylor's downfall wasn't the result of political attack or personal vendetta. It was a result of her own corruption, her inability to uphold the very laws she swore to protect. As the public reflects on her years of unchecked power, they also reflect on the impact of her biased rulings, the lives ruined, the communities marginalized, and the trust in the legal system shattered. Now, that system is healing, thanks to the efforts of one unyielding woman. Minister Rachel Lee, untouched by the personal attacks, continues her work with unwavering resolve. She faces the challenges head-on, knowing that the work of justice is far from over. But her victory over Taylor has redefined what it means to stand up for what is right. While Taylor once used her position for power and influence, Lee has used hers to restore fairness and integrity to a system that was rotting from within. Lee's quiet strength, her steady commitment to doing what's right in the face of adversity, has made her a beacon of hope in a system that has long been corrupted. The contrast between Taylor's arrogance and Lee's integrity couldn't be more apparent. While Taylor sought to control the courtroom with her influence, Lee maintained control through a dedication to truth and equality. And so, the story closes with a powerful reflection on what true power really is. It's not about wealth, status, or manipulation. It's about the strength of character and the courage to stand for fairness and equality, even when the odds seem insurmountable. True power lies in the ability to uphold the law with integrity, to fight for what is right, and to never compromise on your principles, no matter the cost. Judge Taylor may have held the courtroom for years, but it was Minister Lee's dedication to justice, her unshakable belief in the law, and her unwavering pursuit of fairness that ultimately brought Taylor to her downfall. It is Lee's courage that proves the true nature of authority. For in the end, true authority doesn't come from force, but from the tireless pursuit of justice and equality, principles that Minister Lee embodies every single day. As the lights in the courthouse dim and the door closes on this chapter of the legal world, one thing is clear: justice, when pursued with integrity, always prevails. And with that, the world turns a page, leaving behind the reign of a corrupt judge and embracing the strength of a leader who refused to be silenced. Minister Rachel Lee's fight for justice continues, and it's one the world will never forget.